There we go. All right, this is class 5 of our series on moral theology. I'm Bishop Peter Hansen. Today's class covers the cardinal virtues, this virtue being justice, the inclination toward good relationships, and to each his due. You may notice that our Roman Catholic instructor in the textbook quotes C.S. Lewis and Mere Christianity more than all other books combined that he quotes. So he uses an Anglican as his source for a Roman Catholic seminary. And I think that's lovely. Well, anyway, C.S. Lewis has written an entertaining section on morality described as a convoy of naval shipping, described as a metaphor for how we should be ourselves and what we owe to others. Each ship in the convoy needs to be itself seaworthy, well-fueled, and with a well-trained crew aboard, engines fully maintained, everything ship-shape. Then no ship should collide with another ship en route. That would cause another ship to lose its seaworthiness. And finally, every ship needs to have a proper heading and the knowledge of where the fleet is going. Justice is more than simply the medical dictum, first do no harm. That is only one part of morality. People who insist they are heaven-bound will argue they have never hurt anyone intentionally. While this itself is likely to be far from true, it is not the whole gospel at all. That's like the talent buried in a napkin. More than do no harm, we must do good and aim for the right society into which we include others who are taught truth and given the way of life. The Latin for justice, jus, is met with the scriptural admonition of the golden rule. So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. For this sums up the law and the prophets, Matthew chapter 7. The second greatest commandment is to love our neighbor as ourselves, Mark 12:31. We owe it to others to treat them as we would be treated. Justice calls for that level of mutual consideration. Justice enters society, therefore, at an organized level, as the contract inherent in a social order. Criminals are instructed in the law what is not allowed, and if tried and convicted for their violations, they are sentenced to serve time and receive correction. In extreme cases, the death penalty may apply. The permanent nature of the death sentence is met with moral outcries today as being cruel and unusual, beyond the authority of the state to impose on anyone. Movies such as The Green Mile move us with concern for barbaric processes that are scarcely employed today anyway. California, where the death penalty is still available, has not walked any death row inmate down the Green Mile for a quarter of a century. While it's debatable whether we want to make capital punishment the law, to decry it as unbiblical doesn't work as an argument. God made many illicit acts punishable by stoning. Other justice issues in society are economical means made available to some and not others. Policing that applies law differently to different people is unjust. While we want that chapter to be done in America, and surely this card is overplayed, 6 Mississippi officers were just convicted of torturing 2 Black victims of police abuse for 90 minutes. It does happen. There are still bad cops, and while I really love police, they and all of us are shocked when someone goes off and takes the old KKK sheet out of the closet, for heaven's sake. A man I have attended several days training under, Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman, wrote a book entitled On Killing. He calls himself a killologist, the only trained Army Ranger and clinical psychologist who has studied what it takes to kill another human being and how to survive critical high-stress situations. Some of us, soldiers, airmen, Marines, and police officers, are properly tasked for our sakes with the obligation in our name to protect us with means that include lethal methods. They are to kill. Popular entertainment aside, killing is not what humans do to other humans normally. Up through World War II, most soldiers had been discovered to never actually fire their weapons at human enemies at a rate of up to 80% of all frontline troops. Never fired once. They realized these men were trained to shoot at circles, targets with bullseyes. They changed then to silhouette targets and got up to 50% effective engagement in the war in Korea. By Vietnam, we used photorealistic pop-up targets requiring the field soldier to acquire, evaluate, take aim, fire, and reevaluate thousands of times in training. The Vietnam soldier shot the enemy 80% of the time when it was appropriate. Only we didn't know what pushing a man past his reticence to kill human beings would do to him. And we brought them back in transport planes and dumped them in society within a few hours of leaving the field. By and large, these conditioned killers did not become killers among us, but their moral injury done to them through their own actions, legitimately done as soldiers doing their duty, traumatized thousands of them and drove them into drug-dependent lifestyles. Adding to that, the criticism aimed at the war and its military men gave no compensation by acclaim and approval to these brave, injured men. We owed them much better than that. Justice is a virtue that is part of living well, living happy lives. One of the things we expect of God out of our nature and our observation of the order of the universe is that God should be just and ought to apply all his all-powerful goodness to this world more than we observe him doing. We expect that heaven will be seriously just for others, those we feel live brutal, hateful lives. They will get what is coming to them. But we expect God's mercy for us and our loved ones. By our nature, are we selfish or socially minded? Aristotle famously described humans as social animals. What we do with our lives is done best with others, and considering them as interdependent with us. All commitments are in relation to others: school, work, family, home, civic life, police, traffic rules, and enforcement. Back to our car. We expect the rules of the road to be posted and for others to safely abide by the rules, written and unwritten. The expected justice is also to be found in church life, national life, and in our world. And yes, that includes politics. In truth, giving others their due is not against our own interest and the goal of being happy. Altruism appears to have been built into the creature that was made in God's likeness and image. Altruism may be crippled, and of course it was in the fall. Self-interest is our first thought often, and then we feel a pang toward doing more for those in our social sphere. The collective socialistic philosophies that put the common good above the role and rights of individuals actually ruins and tears down the common goals while creating oppression and totalitarianism. Cooperation that is imposed top-down yields a population that is described well as pretending to work so they can pretend to pay us. Totalitarianism is neither a left thing nor a right-wing extreme. Both wings end up at totalitarianism if taken further away from individual rights and obligations of conscience and personal responsibility. Less government allows for bigger citizens. More government results in smaller citizens. Justice pertains to more than criminality, therefore, more than civil matters. Though these are important, justice yields a well-ordered state of affairs. In business, there are many new theories being thought of and tried for management and creative maximizing of teamwork and individual efforts. I once worked some contracting jobs first at the GM assembly plant in Fremont, California. Later, it was reworked into a joint project of GM and Toyota called NUMMI, New United Motors, Inc. The difference was striking. GM had its vast assembly lines taking pre-programmed cars, a Chevy, Pontiac, Olds, etc. This one yellow, that with a particular engine block, this a green vinyl seats, custom each car, coming at pre-ordered times in a never-ending conveyor. If something was wrong or missing, it was just tagged and kept going to fix it later. Nothing stopped that conveyor. Really bad cars were kicked to the side. Toyota took over the plant from the defunct GM management and gave each sectional team the right to stop the conveyor in their sector by pulling a cord, setting off a musical tune, and each worker with the power to stop things and suggesting a better way to build the car. They were rewarded for good suggestions. But the line was efficiently building one car model again and again, Corollas or Chevys, the Innova, I believe, just different body colors. Their quality control was world-class. Every worker was respected. It felt like a just system. Families are an arena for justice. A juggling act of needs and schedules impose one's needs on others. There must be shared times, meals taken together, worship, entertainment, travel. There are times of individual responsibility, chores, homework, making our own beds. At unscheduled times, there will be crises, sickness, weather concerns, and misbehavior to deal with. Some things require set times, others flexibility. Rules are required for suspended mobile that is a family system to exist in harmony with the understanding of what justly is expected of each member. But following the rules is not the deeper reason for those rules, but they are made as a provisional plan for getting to a common goal. We need to take care not to mistake the rules for the goal. The rules serve the higher goal of justice for all, and not the other way around. Aquinas defined law as the dictate of reason made by the legislation of the proper authorities, and once made, the law is made known to all, so that it can serve the common good as a social contract for us to follow. His definition contains 4 key elements: reason. Rules that we make have a specific content and purpose that define the job, whose job it is, and the limits of the rule. Proper authority. By definition, certain persons have authority over others in their specific sphere, such as parents' authority over their children, a CEO's authority with his or her corporation, the Congress making laws for the nation. 3, making known. The rules, once enacted, must be spoken out, posted, announced, and made known and not kept secret. I was once in a lawsuit involving a federal statute with a federal judge so inept that she needed an extra week between filing response briefs and her hearing. But she didn't tell us she had special rules. Yet she was indignant we did not know and filed a few days early. by normal rules, but late, according to hers. And she sanctioned us monetarily for it. Amazing. She left the bench only after a year of posting, so she was no good. Finally, 4, the common good. The purpose of law is designed to aid in the good of all. Rules are created well to address existing and identified problems, not simply in order to impose control over others. Recent debates are held over the merit of the almost fully abandoned affirmative action programs that allowed members of previously disfavored racial groups to gain college admission over other equally or better qualified white applicants. This was to overcome the culturally uneven table and introduce mainly Black students into higher learning. Some programs were also used during the college experience to favor these students. Was it just? It seemed so, because they and their parents' generations had suffered disfavor, and this was recompense. One UC, University of California Regent, Ward Connerly, who served from 1993 to 2005, was famously opposed to affirmative action. His point that these persons would fail later in professional life because they were never made to achieve what others were studying and would not stand in the great equalizing light of real life. Connerly was Black. He said that if you want to fix the problem, make primary schools equal and keep educating all students early on with the best education possible, instead of pushing the problem later on an unprepared Black student who was not given an adequate primary education earlier. Either way, the affirmative action idea doesn't work perpetually. We must get on to equality of choices, opportunities, but not of outcome. There is no such equality. War, can we justify warfare? On a large or smaller scale, either international warfare or city riots, the disruption of justice in inner cities or shared borders with other nations breaches the peace that we all need and expect. War is brought on by one nation seeking such armed conflict in order to serve its own interests. Now, all war is horrible. War is an extreme step that calls for an appropriate response. Every warring nation fashions a justification for itself, whether real or imagined. Like Russia coming after the former Soviet territories as its due, reclaiming Ukraine now by a brutal war. Its excuse, the West forcefully separated Ukraine and other satellite nations from the Soviet bloc after the fall of the USSR. It was the price for our suffering the Cold War for so many years. We won, they lost. We demanded they give up the nations they had acquired by force. And now they're taking them back. The US Civil War, a horribly costly affair, met two opposing American armies, both fighting for what they believed was right and fighting a different war in their minds. The North, for the end of slavery in the South and the keeping of the national union. The South, for states' rights to secede and the ability to find their own time to free their slaves, if ever. Abraham Lincoln saw this dichotomy and mourned the nation's pains in his second inaugural address, where he said, both parties deprecated war, but one of them would make war rather than let the nation survive, and the other would accept war rather than let it perish. And the war came. Each looked for an easier triumph, and a result less fundamental and astounding. Both read the same Bible and pray to the same God, and each invokes his aid against the other. The prayers of both could not be answered. That of neither has been answered fully. The Almighty has his own purposes. Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray, that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. Yet, if God wills that it continue until all the wealth piled by the bondsman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with a lash shall be paid by another drawn with a sword, as was said 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. Our president wrestled with the justice of war with the South, and had obviously done so with a great weight on his conscience to do the right thing at the cost of 600,000 lives. But he found justice in the image of lashes on the backs of countless slaves, being addressed before heaven with a just reckoning for our long betrayed Black members of the American story. Vietnam was a war that ran out of its original reasons for being. It continued on with official lies being told us of what we were doing there and why. We posed the domino theory that the oncoming forced conversion of nations to communism justified this and other armed conflicts, scaled down in order not to light the fuse of a world war with the USSR or China. A balance of power was spoken of, and a proxy war where we mostly fought through local military units trained by American soldiers. But we took the fight over and chewed up thousands of men in arms, taking hills, then giving them back, only to take them again at the loss of yet more lives. The lack of logic and proportionality dispirited our fighting men and lost them their vision of what we were there for. Now, forgive me if I get a little specific, but how we just left Afghanistan after 20 years occupation is a study in massive and incredible foolishness. I have to be political here, but I name nobody. The plan had been to set a date that would be met on the condition that a coalition government of all competing interests in the nation worked together in such a government. Then we would demobilize the civilians, remove military units through the nation, but not including Bagram Air Base, where a strategic placement, like those in Germany or Japan or Korea and other former war zones, would give us a view into China and maintain 2,000 men and women there. But suddenly, under a new administration, a date for departure was forgotten, and so also the give and take of compliance was abandoned. The Taliban triggered their onslaught. We first abandoned the safety of Bagram, and as much as 80 billions worth of military equipment, small arms up to military transport planes and helicopters, plus 5,000 war criminals who were imprisoned there. In this, we gave up the only strategic base for an airlift of citizens and others out of the country. Our own weapons were turned against us and Afghan citizens. Then the ambassadors left. Then we gave the Taliban our list of citizens and nationals who ought to be allowed to leave with addresses. No army on earth has ever done these things. 13 service personnel were killed by one of the terrorists we released from Bagram in a suicide bombing at the airport. Then we dropped a bomb on an innocent Afghani family. So success was declared. In 20 years and thousands of Americans dead to secure a free Afghanistan were forfeited in a week. So how we do war is a major arena of justice played out. No one wants war, and especially total war. Not a world war again, please God. But beside that value that is held in common, there is a range of positions regarding the morality of war. Pacifists believe there is no just use of violence, and they cite Jesus as turning the other cheek. This is a policy of non-resistance. It isn't giving in to injustice, however. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. borrowed the strategy of Mahatma Gandhi to object, march, demonstrate, but remain peaceful, nonviolent in the face of dogs and fire hoses, beatings, and arrests. The world watched, and the nation changed. Most believe in the justice of a just war. War is only rarely applied, and then to secure and maintain a lasting peace. It must not be to acquire territory or treasure. Just war is usually in response to violence done unjustly against us. And two factors are considered. Proportionality. We need to set limits and a scaled investment in use of force, justly and virtuously used. And two, discrimination with regard to non-combatants. No war efforts should be used to specifically bring death to the innocent non-combatants on the other side. Golda Meir, Prime Minister of Israel, once said, "When peace comes, we will perhaps in time be able to forgive the Arabs for killing our sons, but it will be harder for us to forgive them for having forced us to kill their sons. Peace will come when the Arabs will love their children more than they hate us." By this, she was citing the practice of Palestinians firing rockets into civilian centers, killing innocent children, then placing their own rocket launchers, soldiers, etc., inside hospitals and schools in order to challenge the Israeli response to come kill patients and children, or else just take the beating. This describes a very unjust war. We have an obligation always to seek out a path to peace and maintain it by strength of force and the ability to respond, but never initiate. St. Augustine wrote much on the idea of a just war. He said it must be a just cause. The use of force only to correct a great and immediate evil. 2, comparative justice. The party that has been unjustly injured may redress the injury. 3, legitimate authority. Only a sovereign state has the right to employ deadly force, and that's important. It's not a vigilante thing. 4, rightful intentions. You go to war only for a truly just cause. And 5, probability of success. You commit to war and sending boys to die only when there can be a possible positive outcome. Jesus even spoke to this. He said, suppose a king is about to go to war against another king. Won't he first sit down and consider whether he is able, with 10,000 men, to oppose the one coming against him with 20,000? If he is not able, he will send a delegation while the other is still a long way off, and will ask for terms of peace. Luke chapter 14:31. 6, proportionality. The expected destruction will be balanced and outweighed by the ultimate goal achieved. And finally, 7, last resort. You engage in war only after all peaceful alternatives have been exhausted. In waging war, there certainly are rules that apply, at least for Christians who believe in a moral imperative. That goes beyond the Geneva Convention. Of these, some of them are: 1. Non-combatants are immune from direct violence. Civilians may not be the object of direct attack. They may be collateral damage, unfortunately, but not the target. 2. Proportionality. Force may be applied sufficiently for the military objective, not utter destruction, not total war. 3. Right intention. Our aim is for an ultimate peace restored with justice accomplished and with vengeance forbidden. As a note, while debatable, it was Germany's contention that the terms of the armistice from World War I were so oppressive that it made the rise of Nazism necessary. We disagree, but it's important not to let your enemy feel it has no choice but total war. Modern features of warfare make some choices interestingly specific. Smart bombs and laser-directed drone-borne weapons can pinpoint a target so closely that a particular person, Qasem Soleimani, can be found and killed with his entourage, eliminating a terror threat to Americans who had killed hundreds of allies of ours. No war was declared on Iran in doing so, just the evaporation of a bad man. Is it moral? Is it terrorism? Killing is only legal when authorized by the state. Our armies may kill when ordered to do so under a declared war or government authorization. Security officials may kill at need to save someone from deadly assault. Police officers may employ lethal force for self-defense or the defense of others. And civilians may kill for the same reason as police. The virtue of prudence joins with justice here to help define, observe, conclude, and proceed in righteous ways. Now, there was a second chapter we read with a specific case about the atomic bomb dropped in 2 places in Japan in World War II. Our best case for a just war, and the one we always cite for a case to go to war, is the Allied cause against the Axis of Germany, Italy, and Japan in World War II. What else could we do? And the US stayed out of it for 2 years, as it was, and only came in when we were attacked at Pearl Harbor. That generation literally saved the world. The evil done by the 2 major Axis powers were crimes against humanity, certainly countless violations of the rules of war we've been discussing. The Holocaust of 6 million Jews, and almost worse, the Japanese treatment of Chinese prisoners in their concentration camps and use of Chinese prisoners as helpless targets of bayonet training. Japanese soldiers were blooded by killing innocent people for practice, for reward, to get them past that reluctance we naturally feel to killing other human beings. The Bataan Death March and subsequent ill treatment and torturous deaths of war prisoners, the madness of the cause, and a policy of every man, woman, and child committed to fight to the death in defense of the homeland, even when victory for Japan was long abandoned, made the conclusion of the war in the Pacific almost impossible to envision, without as many as 1 million American dead. It was also a command that, should America invade, all American prisoners were to immediately die. Thus, the mortality rate for us, let alone millions upon millions of Japanese deaths, should the US approach the Japanese mainland, was unacceptable. Yet today, without all that perspective, and with the moral superiority of those who can afford to judge, any use by the US of atomic weapons is so commonly deemed a crime against humanity, a spectacle of ultimate evil, and a war against populations, innocent civilians and citizens, by means of a weapon of mass destruction. It raises the question we might want to answer clearly: was the U.S. morally guilty of a war crime, a sin, in dropping the bomb? It was 1945. Victory in Europe had been reached. Hitler shot himself in the bunker. In the Pacific, the Allies were grinding out a victory island by island at great losses every time. My own father was stationed on Peleliu, where 2,700 of ours died and over 9,000 Japanese. General Douglas MacArthur was fulfilling his promise to return to the Philippines. Invasion plans for Japan were being drafted, while negotiations were in progress with Japan for surrender. But our terms were unconditional surrender, and the Japanese wanted more. The Manhattan Project offered a shorter route to victory and to peace. The expected Allied body count in a full-scale invasion was between 250,000 to 1 million lives of our own. Many millions of Japanese, as the fog of war and a religious devotion to victory or death lay over its population. In real terms, every Japanese was a combatant. So we dropped the bomb, first on Hiroshima, then Nagasaki. Both cities had some strategic military targets, but also a civilian population. They were not major cities. We did not drop on Tokyo. Was this a violation of the war dictum, do not target civilians? In certain ways, this emulated our current day problem, where combatants in terror cells dressed like civilians merge with them and attack from schools and marketplaces, mosques, hospitals, etc. A response must take in the innocent. Who is to blame for that? In all wars, the innocent will suffer and always have. Collateral damage is what we call it when these dead were not the specific targets. They only got in the way. The bomb had good and bad effects. The second bomb convinced Japanese leaders that this was not a fluke, and they sought peace unconditionally. That peace, even after the casualties in the two cities were added up, saved countless lives, millions by any count. Lives on both sides, especially the Japanese. The deaths of 100,000 Japanese in the two cities were sudden enough to drive a decision to end the war now. Fortunately, if Japan had not surrendered after Nagasaki, would we have dropped a third? I'm not sure we had another one ready. I'm not sure we would have employed it. Some people have rumored that the pilot that dropped over Hiroshima, unleashing the nuclear age, went crazy and it troubled him immensely. Not true. The pilot of the Enola Gay, named Paul Tibbets, has written about it, and he knows he did the right thing and ended a horrible war. We measured our response, and after the war ended, the U.S. reconstructed Japan into the world economic power that it is today. Has the existence of nuclear bombs been good or bad for our world? In one sense, we ought to know there are some things it would be better not to invent. But once they're with us, a control needs to be over the use of terrifying weapons. We now have much larger bombs than Fat Man and Little Boy. No one has used an atomic bomb in combat since 1945. The Germans and Russians were both in the process of producing the same weapons. They have been the deterrent we may have needed against any full-scale wars between the superpowers in the last 70 years. They have scared us, as in the Cuban Missile Crisis, and now Iran's atomic weapons project. I understand that there are many Japanese who are grateful to the US for using the weapon that so dramatically stopped their government from proceeding with the war until everyone died. War is hell. It is truly said. Hell still exists. We can't talk it away. On occasion, we must deal with it. Did the U.S. do right in using atomic weapons? Asked President Truman where the buck stopped. He appears to have had an untroubled conscience, and we may owe him a debt of gratitude as well. All right, folks, end of lecture. I probably stirred some things up there, so let's hear about it. What do you think? I know there was an awful lot about war in there, injustice, but tell me what you say.
Well, in all defense of Harry Truman, he did understand the odds, what was at stake. And he would have dropped a third bomb. But he also recognized that American lives took a higher value than Japanese lives, even civilians. I know that sounds harsh, but I'm afraid I think it's true.
That's the economy of war. You have to deal with your own interest in a war and your own defense, certainly.
Oikonomia in Greek, yes.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, I think the right decision was made there. We saved many lives by doing that. The amount of Americans that would have died and Japanese would have been a lot more. And it's kept, I think, overall peace in the World War sense, but not in the small scale war.
Yeah, I think it's pretty small-minded to damn America for the bomb when not considering how much we sunk billions of dollars into the Japanese economy and rebuilding and put them on the map. They became, chief competitor for industry with us, certainly in car building. We can see that today. They build better cars than we do.
Yeah, we spent loads of money over there rebuilding the whole economy. And
Gave them a more modern steel producing system than we have ourselves. So
yeah, I think we also didn't want the World War I situation with Germany over in Japan. If we just gave them nothing, where they would have had a lot of angry people.
Right.
Yeah. But they walked out of World War I creating, arguably creating or sowing the seeds for World War II by putting the Germans in a position of feeling that they had no choice, whether you agree or not. It's common belief that they felt they had no choice. And so we kind of set them up. And I don't think they were wrong in doing that, but it did set us up for a problem. And one a lot of nice things, but one of the benefits of being the winner in the Second World War is now we can debate the validity and righteousness or justice or wrongness of war and all of this. Had we lost that war, we would not have that option.
No.
We would not be here today talking about right and wrong and things of that nature. So that's just one more reason why waging that war and the way it was conducted ended up to be good in the long run for us, as bad as it was. I'm very disappointed that we didn't learn better from it. I know my own generation, myself personally, got drug along through the garbage that came along after. And it seems like we're not learning any better after we look at the foolishness of Afghanistan and the futility. So on the one hand, I think we're doing so much better. And on the other hand, I wonder, are we really learning? It reminds me of some of the songs of the 60s and 70s. Are we ahead? Are we behind?
But yet, forgive me, no one has had the courage, if you want to call it that, to set off a nuclear device since.
Mm-hmm.
Those two bombs have had an effect that ripples down to our times. Not even Putin.
Yeah.
He knows what would happen.
He saber rattles with it, but I don't think he's got the guts to do it.
No. It takes a special kind of stupid to go for that one.
And by the way, forgive me for talking like a historian, we killed more people in the firebombing of Tokyo than we did with both atom bombs.
Yeah, sure.
Because we realized that Japanese cities were built mostly out of wood, and so we dropped phosphorus, which didn't stop burning. And we killed, I don't know, what was it? We killed like 250,000 people in one night in Tokyo.
No, we did the
Amazing.
same thing in Germany, in Dresden.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we even though there were stone buildings, we managed to burn that plumb to the ground.
That was a British operation
Yes.
led by Field Marshal Harris. And it's very interesting. Forgive me for getting off track. The British set up a monument, a statue to Sir Arthur Harris, and it was defaced the very next day, not by Germans, but by the English, who still remembered that what he did was simply beyond. It wasn't collateral damage. It was like what Clemenceau and Lloyd George did after World War I. It was pure, horrible, vicious
vengeance.
Vengeance.
Right. It was vengeance, so it was the wrong kind of motivation.
Right.
Trying to match, the Battle of Britain and all the bombing of London and so forth, which was against population, but you don't have to employ the enemy's tactics just to prove you're as good or worse or better or whatever. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
Well, but then the question I have is, like in Afghanistan, we no longer have the intestinal fortitude to take a solution. We spent 20 years there and spent how many billions of dollars, and then ran away within a week, leaving billions of dollars behind, ignoring the Afghan people who had helped us. That to me is a crime.
Amen.
Really so. I mean, we had a victory. Essentially, we had a peaceful nation. They were cooperating with us. They were our allies. And if we had done what was being tried for, which was a coalition government that would rule in our absence and keep that one airbase open, we had a possible stability there we could leave that place with, and it could go on. But instead, we removed the military first, which was, I will never understand that as long as I live. And then to abandon all that equipment on the floor, and all those prisoners who were terrorists, all of them. I don't know.
I think they must have used sharpshooters to shoot their toes off one at a time. They screwed up by the numbers, just boom, 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 boom. Textbook case.
Yeah.
And now China's going in there and running the air base even, which is even worse, having China control that now.
Good job.
Well, they're doing that, but the Chinese have taken over nearly all of the major port facilities in the world. A Chinese company actually runs the Panama Canal Company now and the Suez Canal Company under a contract with the governments. So it's a systematic system.
Yeah.
Let's look at other justice issues for a minute. We got us all on this war, but the justice, of course, pertains to a lot of more immediate, everyday issues. And I mean, if the temper of our souls might be measured once in a while, we can get angry at God because he seems unjust to us. In my life, why don't you take care of this problem, Lord? It would be justice to do it and to take this evil away and give me back my sense of well-being, or someone innocent suffering to give them relief. And we want God to be just in such ways, but we've got to deal with that, and we've got to see it as not our expectations are not the way the world works, the way God works. How do you deal with that when God seems to you unjust?
I don't have any problems because I'm firmly convinced that God is love. He is justice. Therefore, he gave us free will, and we are the ones who commit crimes against his justice.
Yes.
And one of the
I think
things
they-
we need to look out for is the fact that we need to stop being selfish in regards to that, where we think that if we want God to do something for us that we think would be justice for us, actually may be injustice for somebody else, would not be just for them. So we have to stop looking at it in a selfish type aspect as well.
We are
Yeah,
single threads in a big tapestry, and we don't know what all is going on in
Mhm.
everybody else's thread.
It's not a quid pro quo, and it's the problem I have to, or the thing I have to remind myself. Well, as soon as I looked at the word justice, I went back to my sixth grade opinion of justice as in just us, and I have to remind myself it's not just us. And even today, after all these years, I still have to remind myself it's all about the greater good, God, the greater good. And frankly, I have a problem staying on track with the virtues as we are studying them one at a time, because it's so important. But the more I look at them, the more I realize how they're so interdependent. You can't really do one without the other, and it's I enjoy taking one topic at a time, but then I want to remember, well, what about prudence? And what about this one? Or what about that one? I can't, I keep trying to put the whole thing together in one package, and it's a bit soon.
We're giving you pieces of a bigger puzzle, and there's a
Right.
whole reflective end of this that
Yes.
comes
I
much
keep
later.
trying to do it prematurely, I think.
Well, yeah. After we will talk about the theological virtues of faith, hope, and love, or charity, we will talk about grace. And in that chapter, it's very interesting how he develops that there is another level of these four initial cardinal virtues that we're talking about, where they're not really relating to God. It is just doing well by yourself and internal processes and how you deal with others and how you deal with the world. But he says, now you step that up and say, now in God's grace, it becomes another kind of charity, another kind of prudence, another kind of temperance, and another kind of justice of a higher order that does orient us to God. And so it's a whole other level. We'll be getting to that. And maybe you're feeling the need for it, and there is a need for it. Among Christians, the cardinal virtues have another supercharged, ported in however you jack up a car. It's a whole other system, and it's coming up in a little bit, but it's about 10 weeks off. So great. Okay, anything else about justice? Justice in our land. Gosh, you can't stay away from politics in this particular subject. I got to try to stay out of that. But justice and injustice, and where it is comes up. There is an ultimate justice, and Bishop Ashman has denoted that it is God's justice that we will finally see, and it will be perfect. It will be perfect, and nothing was going to be left out that we thought was being ignored. And he will make us to realize he was just right on all the time. That takes faith. And so in the meantime, we do as justly as we can.
And I suspect we will find out we've been arguing about the wrong things all along.
Probably. Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's like the guy who went to heaven and found all these wonderful fellow Christians, but they looked around and saw this little line of trees, and there's a whole bunch of people over there. He says, "Who are those over there?" He said, "Oh, shh. Those are the Baptists." And they said, "Well, why are they over there alone?" He says, they think they're the only ones here. Yeah, I do appreciate, and I think most people do appreciate about us Anglicans. We don't think we're the only ones saved. So, just be saved. That's the best thing. Anyone else got anything to hit down the fairway, or we'll just wrap it up? Okay.
Just to say thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. It's an interesting subject. Let me end with our collect for this particular class. The Lord be with you.
Thy spirit.
O God, whose blessed Son was manifested, that he might destroy the works of the devil and make us the sons of God and heirs of eternal life. Grant us, we beseech thee, that having this hope, we may purify ourselves, even as he is pure, that when he shall appear again with power and great glory, we may be made like unto him in his eternal and glorious kingdom, where with thee, O Father, and thee, O Holy Ghost, he liveth and reigneth ever, one God, world without end. Amen.
Amen.
And let's see, well, Father Paul, would you offer us a blessing? Close us out of here. Unmute yourself. There you are.
Our Holy Father, especially Saint Joseph the Girl of May the Lord have mercy upon us and save us, for he is good. He loves mankind.
Amen. All righty. See you all next week, God willing.